And thank you for inviting me here today. I appreciate the chance to meet everybody. I am masked up because I've got a bit of a cold today, so I am trying to keep my distance from people. But please feel free to come see me afterwards and maybe sit across the table from me to ask any questions that you might have. And I'll try to avoid spreading this around to anybody. It's definitely not COVID, but you definitely don't want it. So I wanted to start our LiRN update today with the eLearn suite of electronic resources. It's one of the first things that we started doing last year, and we were really excited to be able to bring in more electronic databases than we've ever had before. So when we were asking for this money, we put together a list of what lawyers in BC get and what lawyers in Alberta get and what lawyers in Quebec get in terms of electronic centralized databases. And there was a stark difference between that and what we had been able to provide. And I don't think I have to tell anybody here that the system had been underfunded for quite some time. So we were working with Quick Law and a couple of free resources, and that was it. So we were able to get, well, we still have Quick Law. We were able to add practical guidance to that, all of the modules, which was quite helpful. We worked with Thomson Reuters to put together a special package with Westlaw so that we could have criminal source, family source, and estates and trusts source. In future years, we may look at expanding this, but from our conversations with various library staff across the province, it seemed like these three would be the most popular ones to start with. We would like to add more. Next year, we're going to be focusing on adoption and sort of settling into all of the changes that have happened, but we are looking forward to being able to add more at some point. We worked with Felix to get the Irwin Law Collection and their whole core Canadian collection online. We also got the Vincent AI Research Assistant. Wasn't very expensive. They practically threw it in for us. It's going to be interesting to see what the uptake on that one is. I haven't heard a lot about it so far, but I know that the Canadian Core Collection has been very popular. We're right now collecting a bunch of usage statistics from across the system so that we can put it together in our year-end report and sort of demonstrate how widely used all of these things are. So it'll be interesting. That'll be something that we send to you guys. You can send all of your members as well. Hein Online and the CPD resources are two of the ones that we already had. Hein Online is provided to us through the Great Library, actually, and CPD resources online. We just included that, so it looked like we had something back in the days that we only had Quick Law. So together, it's a pretty comprehensive suite of resources that are generally available to, say, lawyers on Bay Street that are prohibitively expensive if you're trying to buy it yourself. I think FOLA, in some of your advocacy work with ventures, this budget cycle was able to put out the cost of buying this suite on your own. It's incredibly cost prohibitive. So it's great to be able to provide this as a central resource for anyone who wants to access it. The next big question that always comes up with the e-learning suite, or with the e-suite, is will we be able to get remote access? Because right now you have to go into the library for the most part to access these resources. And the answer to that is not yet, but we are working on it with the publishers, also from the technology perspective, what we would need to be able to sort of control the membership. Would we have to link into the Law Society's, like how would all of that work? Assuming the technology would work out, how much would it cost us, and whether or not we would be able to get something reasonable from the publishers. So it is on our radar screen, but I wouldn't hold out a lot of hope for that anytime soon. If any of you have ever had to try to negotiate with Thomson Reuters, you probably understand where I'm coming from. Some of the new policies, before I get into the HR policies, there's a sort of a late breaking policy I wanted to mention. It didn't make it to the slide because it wasn't finished yet when I handed these in. but we're looking at a collection management and retention policy. There's a team of library staff from across the province, the library advisory team, that we've been working closely with on this policy. In some ways, it's just sort of writing down the obvious. We want to be able to have a policy that sets out what the criteria are for making decisions about adding to the collection and retaining things in the collection. Part of that is for new staff who come in and don't necessarily have the experience to understand how to make these decisions on their own. And some of it is to demonstrate how these decisions are made. There's a lot of professional judgment that's brought to bear on making the decision on whether to acquire something. It's not as simple as, we have this electronically, therefore we're going to cut the print. And that is a perception that we're trying to proactively address, because it is not that simple. And I think everybody in this room appreciates that. I don't think everybody who provides the funding appreciates that. So we want to sort of proactively get out there and say, look, these are complex decisions. We have professional staff who make these decisions based on a number of criteria, and this is how that's done. So anticipate that being a fairly non-controversial policy. We are bringing it before the board in December. So I can let you know more about that as it progresses. Now to the ones I actually have written down. We had, and most of you are aware of these because many of you attended the consultations that we did, which was extremely helpful. So there's a core library services and management responsibilities policy, additional services and responsibilities policy, and the network library staff employment guidelines. There's been a lack of clarity on what LiRN's expectations are around what services should be offered by all of the libraries. There was nothing in our repertoire of policies that set any of that out, which caused a little bit of confusion. Clarity was required on how the grant monies are intended to be spent. So if it's unclear what's a library service and what's an association service, well then how do you know what library staff are supposed to be doing? It gets very confusing. The difficult part is that it's a very gray area, and especially for some of the smaller local associations, there's a lot of gray area between association and library work, and it's not so easy to just draw a line through it and say this is library and this is association. But we do have to try to bring some clarity to it. So we created these policies. We held a number of consultations. So we did consultations with the library advisory team, with presidents of associations, with FOLA, with the LSO, with the TLA as one of our shareholders, and then with FOLA, the LSO, and TLA together as our shareholders. And we got a ton of feedback. We were able to make some great revisions to the first policies, which were what they were. They were perfect, and the newest versions are by no means perfect either. But it was extremely helpful to get a lot of the feedback so that we could start to see where the gray areas were a little bit better, and how we could at least start to draw some lines. And again, where we ended up going with it is more of a description of how do you make these decisions as to whether something's association or library, as opposed to putting out a list of this is association always and this is library always. So you see with CPD, it gets really messy, because is it an association thing or is it a library thing? If the money is going to the association, then we don't want to claim it as library, because then that takes away a revenue stream that an association might be counting on, but then library staff are working on it. So it gets really convoluted. And one of the major pieces of feedback that we incorporated into the most recent versions is to have a transitional period. So they have it stated as a transitional period of 2 years with a review at the end of it, because as much as we think we've got a solid draft at the moment, it may not play out in practice the way we're envisioning it. So we need to sort of put it out there and see how it works and be open to changes with it. So on the timelines of it, we introduced it last spring. We got a bunch of feedback. We asked for more feedback on a second draft in the middle of the summer, which in retrospect was not the best timing. And we got some feedback saying, we've got vacations, it's August, what are you doing, essentially. So we extended that deadline to the end of September. And I've now had the chance to incorporate all the feedback I got into some new drafts. And I would like to, I got lots of feedback from a lot of different sources, but the TLA and Joan and Aaron gave me a really detailed markup, which was extremely helpful. So that's going to the board in December as well. And so after the board has had a look at the new versions, I'll be able to communicate back out to everybody where we're at with that. Just making sure I didn't miss anything. Okay, so specifically on some of the policies, the core library services and library management responsibilities policy, again, this was to provide some clarity on what LiRN's expectations are around what libraries offer. The tricky thing here was that not all of the libraries have the capacity to offer everything on this list. And I think what we need to do during this transitional period is figure out if it's possible, if more funding or more staff, or if there are things that can make it possible. And if not, then we have to carve that out, those kinds of exceptions and that sort of thing into the policy. The intention behind the additional services and responsibilities policy, that was the one where we're trying to bring some, I've described it as drawing a fuzzy line through a gray area, trying to figure out how to determine if something's association or something's library. Some are very obvious, some are not so obvious, and it's those ones that are not obvious that we're gonna have to work through on the transitional period and say, the way we wrote it with these criteria, does that make sense? Is it working for you? So that we can kind of revise that as we go along, as we're working with it on the ground. The network library staff employment guidelines. And here we've used the word guidelines here as opposed to policy, just to make it very clear that we're not trying to step in and be the employer. The associations are the employers. It's not LiRN's role. So we're offering a number of things to assist. We get a lot of questions from associations. Like, can I provide a job description? Can you provide this? Can you provide that? And so this is intended as a support, as helpful as a provision of samples that can be used and adapted for those associations that have HR policies in place. You don't need it. And so we're not trying to suggest that you now have to change and use what we're giving here as samples. These are strictly meant to be helpful for those associations who could use it. Oops. Okay. Financial reporting. So we've had some feedback. And I know we're doing a whole session on the chart of accounts and financial reporting later, so I won't get too far into it, but we have had some feedback that the budget templates that we ask people to fill out is just, it's too detailed, it's too much. From my perspective, trying to go through 48 of those with a page full of GL numbers it's a lot, and so I started questioning, why do I need all of this information, and do I need all of this information? Essentially, what I need to be able to answer is if there's a big variation between the budget and the actual spend, I need to be able to answer that question. And the amount of detail that we're currently working with is more than we need, basically. So I've been working with the treasurer of LiRN to figure out what she needs, what our accountant needs, what our auditors are comfortable with in terms of paring that all down. What I have heard from some libraries is that they would prefer to continue using the detailed the detailed budgets and financial reporting, and that's fine. I just want to, make an option for those libraries who do not want to provide that level of detail. And I think that it would be helpful if I make it clear to the libraries that are providing that much detail how much of it I'm actually going to be looking at when I go through it. Because going forward, it's probably not going to be looking at every line item. I did that for 2 years and saw no point in it. It was just, frankly, it wasn't useful for any reason. So we are looking at a new budget template that just has sort of larger categories. We can report on how we're spending a great deal on electronics. We're doing well in this. So the big buckets: electronic subscriptions, print resources, payroll expenses, operating expenses, and capital purchases. Excuse me. Sorry. So as I said, that would be optional. If you want to use that template, you'd be welcome to. If it's easier for you to use what you've always used. Oh, thank you so much, Alan. That would be fine too. We don't want to force anything on an association that's going to double their work in terms of the financial reporting. We just want to make sure that we're not overburdening you with reports on things that we're not even using. Excuse me. So in 2023, for the 2024 budget year, we have been working on a new trial balance template, and I'm not going to be going through that today because that still has a lot of work to do. I've only shared it with a few people across the system, so I haven't had a lot of feedback on it yet. But it would be a simplified version of the current trial balance template that's more in line with the new template for budgets. And again, opt in, because for many people, they press a couple of buttons in the Sage accounting system and it spits out the report, and we don't want to mess that up for people. So, oops, I went too far. So on those financial reporting templates, we're looking at putting together a working group of library staff in the next year so that we can talk through how the templates work, how the reporting works, and make sure that we're not adding to anybody's burden with that. And I'll have a little bit more to say about the financial reporting in the next session. One last thing that I wanted to mention was something that we've been doing with library staff is a professional development curricula. So my colleague Jackie Fex, who is a talented librarian in her own right, has been working with me on putting together a number of different sessions for the library staff across the system. We've been doing it over Zoom for the past year, and that culminated in October with the Learn with LiRN annual conference. That was formerly known as COLAL. We changed the name to reflect the same name as the entire professional development curriculum that we had. So I wanted to extend my thanks and appreciation to the association presidents for making it so easy for the library staff to get the time off they needed to be able to come down to Toronto and attend the conference. It was a good conference. There were lots of great learning opportunities. We had somebody, we had a marketer who calls herself the accidental library marketer. She was fabulous. She had a lot of good ideas on getting people back into the libraries after COVID. We also had a great speaker who's both a librarian and a psychiatrist or psychologist to talk about vicarious trauma. So as you know, there's a lot of librarians hear a lot of things. They're on the front lines, and similar to like a bartender or something. They're a friendly face that people know, and so they do occasionally have to bear the weight of other people's trauma that they're going through. And so we thought this session would be helpful for that. And then there were some more, hard library science type sessions as well. But it was a great conference, and we were really happy that so many people were able to come, and we really appreciated the associations working with us to make sure that the librarians could get down and join us for that. So that was it for what I had prepared. I'm assuming we would probably have some questions. Hi. Oh.
I can speak loudly.
Hold on, it's not for the volume, it's for the record.
Hi, I just wanted to ask if you have had any update on the release of some salary benchmarks for library staff. You had suggested that they were coming soon, and it's been a while.
Yeah.
It would be very helpful.
Yeah. So we started with, we hired the HR consultant way back in January, I think it might have been February. And then as we dove into trying to define the roles, we found that that was a much larger process than we thought it was going to be, was to define the various roles. They're so different throughout the system. There's 5 categories of roles that we landed on, but really there's so much more across the system. So we ended up putting together a bit of a matrix of the roles. So you can, here's a law librarian role, but there may be aspects of this, and so you can mix and match throughout the columns with the matrix. So when we finally got that settled over the summer, we were able to take that and give it to the HR consultant. So she recently gave me the draft compensation report that she put together. And I have that scheduled to go to my network policy committee on I want to say the 18th. It's definitely mid-November. So I'll be able to share more about that later. I just wanted to have the committee's eyes on it first to make sure that it makes sense from their perspective before we started sharing it more widely.
Any other questions before we get to Alan? Take it away, Alan.
Okay. So most of my work for FOLA is being centered on the Practice Resource Center Committee, for which I am the chair this year. And really, what we're trying to do is be helpful to the associations with respect to advocacy. I personally feel a very strong connection to the association and to the libraries myself, and I know that many of you do as well. And so we have to protect those libraries. There is, some significant pressure, funding pressure on the libraries, not like necessarily from LiRN, but, there are benchers, they have, positions on funding. We're working at all levels to try and ensure proper funding. And we're also trying to obtain accurate, up-to-date feedback from the associations about what's happening, what's working, what's not working. Again, this is a federation, and a federation that is your association. So we want to make sure we're getting the proper feedback. And to that point, our committee has 3 librarians on the committee, so that we're getting feedback from the trenches, as it were. And we have tried to mix in regional representation from lawyers, not just FOLA executive, but others who are involved in their associations locally, so that we can get the right type of feedback, and you can point us in the right direction, quite frankly. A lot of what we've worked on this year, Theresa was just telling you about LiRN policies, and certainly we have been working quite extensively on the LiRN policies. In June, we got what we'll call the first draft. I'm not sure that it was, but it was a 27-page document. I thought it was quite detailed. There was a lot of stuff in there to unpack, but essentially it dealt with the definition of core library services, additional library services, tried to deal with the distinction between association versus library tasks carried out by staff, had detailed descriptions of the roles of staff, and sort of what I'll call the minimum HR expectations for associations, a guideline that can be used to help us meet a minimum standard as associations, which I think for the most part was useful. But what I really want to talk about is the consultation process, which was over the summer. Theresa outlined that for you. I heard from many of the associations individually about their sessions with Theresa and her committee. She had a very knowledgeable committee working with her, small group, but that sometimes is actually better to help pivot and do things quickly. And I thought overall, my perception is that they were very willing to listen to all of the associations that were giving them feedback, including ours. And we've seen our version of the document, I'll call it the August 18th version of the document, was significantly different than the original document. And I think the new document provides a lot of flexibility to the associations. I think that's the intention of the document. And that's because there are 48 associations that do things a little bit differently, depending on geography, depending on the size of your association, maybe depending on some traditions which have grown out of all of your circumstances. It's not a one-size-fits-all scenario. That I don't think that's what's being the intention of what's being imposed. There is a desire for minimum standards in certain respects, and that's well within the purview, I would say, of LiRN and or the Law Society for that matter. But I was really appreciative of like I said, the amount of feedback which was taken up and how different the document looked the second time around. Just on a physical basis, the first document was 27 pages, the second document was 10 pages. I mean, that's a tremendous change. Now, the role for the staff role descriptions was removed from that second document, and Theresa's told you that that's a work in progress, and that'll be something that maybe we'll provide feedback on going forward in the future. But I really overall was relatively pleased. No document is going to be perfect. I think Theresa already said that, and I think we would agree. But having said that, there's certainly a lot of work that has been done. I will just point out that the LiRN has made some provision for the situation where library staff are carrying out association tasks, and has designated that up to 15% of the time spent by a staff person on association tasks can be still within the library grant, just to provide, again, some additional flexibility. The original document said 10%. FOLA was hoping for 20%. The second document said 15%. FOLA still, asked Theresa to, let her board know that we think that the 20% is correct. What will happen with that will be up to the board, I guess, in December of this year, and obviously we'll communicate that to you as we find out more. One of the other things that I really liked about the second document that we saw was that it provided for a 2-year transition period. I think that, some of the associations will be right on top of this, and they'll have it all figured out already. Maybe they were already doing a lot of the things that were required by the policy. Other associations will have more of a catch-up time, and that transition period reflects that fact. And I think that was great. And I also thought the fact that there are going to be further consultations. Theresa didn't use this term, but I'll call it a living document. It is not meant to be static. It's a living document which will change over time. And as the associations begin to work with the document and realize, problems or issues or whatever we're going to call that, I hope that feedback continues up through the Practice Resource Center Committee, and we'll bring those issues on your behalf to Theresa and to the LiRN board, because that's part of what we do. But overall, I think it's been a reasonably good process thus far. Again, we'll see what the final document looks like, and we'll continue to want to receive your opinions about that. And the last thing I would say from my perspective that I've been working on most recently is the LiRN budget, which obviously we don't have any part in that process. LiRN creates their own budget, and they don't tell us about that in advance. But we came to learn that the 2023 budget for LiRN was going to cause an increase to the annual dues of lawyers, something like $17. But a certain number of members, benchers, had brought a motion forward in October, I think the October 27th meeting, to cap annual fees with some very minor exceptions, but it could have derailed the ask that LiRN wanted, and certainly we want LiRN to get that additional funding so that they can expand the resources that you've already heard Theresa tell you that she's been working on. But you know, it takes money, right? I mean, that's the bottom line. These publishers definitely don't work for free, no pun intended. So,
Alan, we want to leave time for questions. So
oh, okay.
You're good?
Listen, yeah, if you tell me to stop talking,
Keeping on track.
But I do get paid by the word, so I'll keep talking if you want. Really
We have
will.
time for 2 quick questions if anyone has a question for Alan. Rick?
Thanks, Alan. I appreciate the update, and also to you, Theresa, as well. Just, I guess, a comment or suggestion with respect to use of terminology and the interplay between law library and practice resource center. I think, certainly from my standpoint and CCLA standpoint, and from an advocacy perspective, there's a lot of equity in law library as opposed to practice resource center. It exists in a lot of the foundational documents, and you see it. On one set, it's Practice Resource Center. Someone else refers to it as Law Library, and I think certainly in the documentation that went forward to convocation, it's referencing law libraries, and people understand law libraries really, really well, and there's a lot of equity in that. So I kind of make a pitch to maybe go and use law library as opposed to practice resource center.
You know, I thank you for that, Rick. Listen, I come from the law library point of view. I'm having to retrain my brain a little bit, but you know, when people think of law library, sometimes they forget all of the things that the library can do, and I guess that's why the practice resource center terminology is being taken on. I mean, librarians, I'm sure the CCLA is like this. I mean, my own personal experience is the HLA. If I call with a question, that librarian will have the research for me. If I need, you know, my CPD, the Law Association will have that for me, and it's always been that way. The mentorship, and we really want to reflect those other elements, because I think sometimes, you know, the easy words are law library, right? Since we went to law school, we've used that terminology, and it's been around, you're right, for over 100 years. I understand that. But at the same time, I guess mentally, we just want to reflect for people that is only one pillar, really, and that the association libraries are a hub of competency. And that's why we get to that. So I respect what you're saying, and certainly the terminology it doesn't just roll off my tongue either, but it's, you know, it reflects something a little bit broader than what I guess we traditionally think of as library. So in any event,
I think hub of competency is such a great turn of phrase.
yeah.
For what goes on in the libraries. There's a lot that goes on there besides what people sometimes traditionally think of as libraries. So I understand the impetus to want to change the terminology to sort of broaden people's understanding of libraries, but it doesn't roll off my tongue either.
I know, it doesn't roll off the tongue. I agree with that.
Let's do it. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the chart of accounts, and I have tried fruitlessly to try to make this an interesting presentation, and it's just not going to be. So I apologize in advance. This is going to be boring, but it's necessary. Excuse me. So the chart of accounts that we use sets out all of the GL numbers that are used in the network library system accounting. And I have to make sure I'm reading this because accounting is not my forte. So I want to make sure I'm getting it right for you. We have seen the need for some changes to the chart of accounts. It hasn't really been looked at in a number of years. So we've been looking at it. We've heard from libraries where we need things like a section for bad debt and things that are missing. Changes have happened to the collections over the years. For example, we have a line item for CD-ROMs in the existing template, which is not that much of a thing anymore. But no line item for electronic database subscriptions. So, there is some, before we even get to the pared down version that I'm currently working on, there's some cleanup that has needed to happen with the current chart of accounts just to make it make sense. And because it doesn't totally make sense for people right now, people are using it differently. And that makes sense because it's not obvious. Where would you put an internet-based electronic subscription, under internet or CD-ROM? It doesn't, naturally make sense. So we have a line item called internet that's down under operations, which is supposed to be for how you pay your internet bill. But of course, people use it for internet-based resources because that just makes sense. So there's some cleanup that has needed to be made. And we've been working on just making some of those minor changes to make it a little bit more clear. The libraries provide, or practice resource centers, provide a trial balance every quarter. And as I said, the template for that includes all of the GL accounts. And that's where we see some inconsistencies across the system on where things are being recorded. And again, that's nobody's fault but LiRN's. That's not the library staff's fault. It's that we have given an out-of-date chart of accounts. So what we're doing, and there's also library staff who come into the system and get an old template that they don't really know what to do with because, like you said, some of the categories don't necessarily make sense. So there's a few problems with it that we're trying to work on addressing over the next year. The updated chart of accounts, which I mentioned earlier, it's just the streamlined version of this. So it's things like making it clear that the internet line item is for your internet access charges. We've changed the name of CD-ROMs to be electronic subscriptions, so you can put anything that's sort of your electronic subscription in there. Just sort of making those obvious changes to help make it easier to read and easier to use to promote more consistency across the system. We are going to be looking at putting together a working group early next year of library staff so they can help us work through some of these issues. We also want to look at the possibility of an upgraded accounting software. So everyone, well, not everyone, a while back, everybody was required to use Sage. And some people are still on that, some people aren't. We hear a lot of complaints about it. We've had maybe one or two people say they love it and they don't want to switch. But it's chaos right now in terms of what's out there across the system. So we're going to look at whether or not we can centrally provide something like QuickBooks Online. And I think we would have to start with an opt-in sort of system for that because it can be chaotic to try and change accounting systems. Not everybody's going to have the wherewithal to do that within a certain time period. So there'll be lots of news to come on the financial reporting stuff as next year progresses. Now, the chart of accounts itself, in the materials, you'll see that I've sort of broken it all down. And this is the newest version, but it still needs some work. But this is where we're at with the template. I don't propose to go through every single line item here today. And I imagine that none of you want me to do that. But if you'd really like me to, we can sit down later and talk about petty cash accounts. But for now, I'm just going to speed through. I think, as I mentioned, most of the confusion comes around the collection expenses. one question that comes up sometimes is, I've got a loose leaf, but I only buy it every year. I don't subscribe to the update service. Where do I put that? And the chart of accounts says it goes under textbooks and annuals, not under loose leafs, but it's not that clear for people. So sometimes it ends up under loose leafs because it's a loose leaf. So we are working to bring some consistency around that. There's another question that we'll be working out over the next year in terms of periodicals. So we have a item for periodicals. Well, if you have an online subscription, does that count as an online subscription or does that count as a periodical? That's the kind of thing I'm going to be asking for input from the library staff on, because they will have some good ideas about how they need to be able to track that for their own purposes. And so I think it's better coming from the library staff to tell us what works as opposed to us trying to make a definition. This one, the electronic subscriptions, this is the one that was the line item formerly known as CD-ROMs. So what we've tried to make clear here is that if it's an electronic database subscription, we want it here. If it's an internet access expense, we want it down under the operational expenses, because that's what it takes to keep the library going. That is really all I wanted to say about the chart of accounts. I wanted to provide you with this sort of list so you could read through it and see where we're at currently. But there's really not much more to say about it. So I'm going to pass it on to a more interesting part of the conversation. And this is on the actual financial reporting and accounting.
Okay, so it's an interesting use of the word interesting. We'll go with it.
It's going to be more interesting than the chart of accounts.
So this is in no way, shape, or form like a policy guideline. This is just, maintaining our fiduciary relationship to our board, Ashley and MJ style. So there's the president's perspective, and then there's the staff's perspective. Okay, that's just who we are. Thanks to Simone for doing this amazing presentation. I don't know how to do this.
Neither do I, which you can tell from my PowerPoint.
But we need to get one of these little clickers at the office. Okay, so my perspective. I'm Mary Jo's employer, but I'm also the representative of our entire membership. So in order to keep communication going and make sure that we're doing our job and that we're responsible to the people that we're answerable to, it seems common sense, but a lot of associations don't have monthly board meetings. We do, and 7 of our members have to be there, and our full complement is 13. And we're pretty good at getting quorum most months. Communication with staff and members, expense transparency, we talk about everything. So again, we do take a summer break, July and August, but the communication between Mary Jo and I is maintained, and then I communicate with the board throughout, or the membership throughout those months. Again, 7 members, and we kind of bribe people to come to our meetings with pizza and wings from the Rex in Welland. So if you have a chance, it's really great pizza, the best in Niagara.
Can I come?
Yeah, for sure. Some of us bring refreshments. We have one member, Dougie, who brings a beer. He walks over from his office every meeting with a beer. He's yet to bring one for everyone. But we basically bribe our members, and attendance has we've had 1 in person, maybe 2.
We just started in person last month.
Just started last month.
Everybody came.
Everyone came.
Yeah.
We ran out of pizza. So from a financial perspective, at every meeting, the treasurer does the draft statements, sends them out to the board. We review them, and we have our email communications about what things mean, and then MJ explains very slowly in small words to her group of children, lawyers, what everything means. And then there's a motion to approve the financial statements every month at the meeting. It's usually pretty normal stuff. We've got some CPD revenue, coffee revenue for when the children pay for their coffee at the courthouse. And if there's a big expense, we talk about it at the board, vote on it, and generally things get passed. We have one board member that likes to say no to literally everything we want to do, so he's good for a challenge. And then after the decision's made, we communicate it with the membership. Communication with staff and the members, that's the key for me. Mary Jo and I are probably in touch, well, daily, not probably, every day we're texting or emailing or calling each other. And I'm willing to admit that's probably excessive and you probably don't need that level of communication. But we have it, and I've been here in this position for quite a while. Anthony, it's really time for you to take over. So we've developed a really good rapport, and we're both the type of people who don't really say no to anything. For instance, presenting on topics that they really had never considered before. So here we are. We have a number of programs, so our level of communication might be abnormal, but you need to have a decent level of communication and a good relationship, and we have a great working relationship. And, you know, if I could recommend anything to you, it's get an MJ, because she drives the ship and makes sure that we're all doing what we need to do. She's been with the association
21 years.
21 years. You know, I just guessed. I was telling Kathleen that it was when you were pregnant with Aries.
Right.
So 21 years. And she knows more than anyone, and it's important because the board turns over, or at least the board is supposed to turn over every 2 years. So you get incoming board members not really knowing how to do things, and then Mary Jo's always there knowing exactly what to do all the time. So please don't offer her a job. You cannot have her. She's mine.
I'm not going anywhere.
No, good. Anything that I do, we did a better writing campaign to the benchers about for funding for LiRN recently, and we got, I think,
Thank you.
you're welcome. I think Katie called me and said, hey, can you circulate this? So then I circulate it to MJ, and she blasts it to the whole board, and we get feedback. And I know Anthony and I have sent all the letters, and a couple other board members. I don't know who else from the membership, but that's fairly typical. You send out mass communications about everything, and then most of the times from your broader membership, we don't get a huge response. There's a couple people. The big one I remember is when we redid our bylaws. Graham, at the time, was, I don't know what he was, but he was drafting the bylaws. Sent out 15 different revisions, got no comments, no comments. Then at our AGM, there was a lawyer who stood up and didn't want to support anything. And why wasn't she informed? Turns out she just didn't know how to use email. So check your email, respond to your president. We also dealt with the paralegal involvement and the family law perspective. I tend to take on more family law type things because that's in my wheelhouse and that's what is important to me. But we do have subcommittees. We've got a criminal lawyer, a real estate lawyer, some people who do estates and civil litigation. So all of the different areas are represented. And again, any type of significant expense. We've been going back and forth on new furniture for the law library for months, and we just couldn't commit. But I think we've selected it, we've committed, and that's just basically, we talk about budget and then it becomes Mary Jo picks it, she's got to live with it. And then the big thing, and Theresa alluded to this, well, basically spoke all about it, is what's a library expense and what is a social expense. And that can get murky, and you do have to have conversations with that, and MJ can tap into her resources. And that's all I have to say. Communication is key, and get yourself an MJ.
Okay. All right, just have to click this little
Just a
button.
claim is go, yeah.
All right. So I'm just going to preface this presentation by saying, I think Ashley alluded to at the beginning, that this is based on best practices at Welland County. And I have worked there for 21 years, and our membership base is approximately 135 lawyers, and I'm a full-time employee, so I'm just going to put that out there. Because obviously not all associations are the same or have the time to do everything that a full-time staff person would. You see the buckets: collections, salaries, operations. I've always looked at our grant funding as buckets of money. And I think a lot of us in the libraries talk about our buckets of money. And and that's how you prepare your budget, right? Based on those 3 big categories. So now I'm going to just break down what we do on a monthly basis and a quarterly basis, and then the year end for accounting. So every month you have to do an account reconciliation. That's done within your Sage software or whatever software. And I do a summary and a detailed report, and then prepare the financial reports for the monthly board meetings. And so some of the revenues in there would be for the library, copies, printouts, your LiRN grant money. Expenses will be, hey, those buckets again: collections, salary, operations. And then on the association side, because we have 2 sets of books, the revenues would be from CPD, membership dues, coffee sales, and then expenses would be the FOLA levy, any social events, any gifts and memorials that we support. So these kind of reports keep the board informed. And so, especially in the way of, usually it's collections that I talk about more than anything, just to let them know what's been purchased, what I think is coming down the pipe, how that bucket of money is doing. And on the association side, it would be keeping the board informed about maybe a recent CPD, what the attendance would be, what the revenue was from that. And then sometimes that breaks out into further discussion about how much CPD we need to be doing or not doing. And then on a quarterly basis, I would review income statements and balance sheets reports. You can run comparative income statements within your software, and it's a really good tool because you can look at your actual versus your current budget, and Sage has a few options for those types of reports. And then you also have to prepare your trial balance for LiRN. And so you have to ensure that all your items are categorized in the right line items in your chart of accounts.
Which, as we've covered, is not that easy. And
So,
not for your, not on your fault, but.
Right, so you're gonna get that the once over, right? Like produce the trial balance and then just make sure that you've actually put everything in the right, in the right line item. And confirm that all your accounting entries are in for that quarter before you actually produce and send that report off to LiRN. And the way that those reports would be used at the board meetings would be just to remind the board that some revenues and expenses do ramp up at certain times. So Q1, your association will ramp up because you're taking in membership dues. On the library side, collections typically tend to ramp up in the 3rd and 4th quarter because you have a clearer picture of how much the publishers are charging you for your collections, and then you want to be spending that budget money. And sometimes there's fire sales at the end of the year. And then finally, the year-end stuff. So, Simone, thank you for making this really awesome timeline. So everybody does things differently. Again, this is how I do it at the WCLA. But I do produce audit trail reports. Again, Sage has amazing checklists that you can print off and get all the reports that are needed. And it's a really good checklist of year-end procedures. And then you prepare your T4 slip or slips, depending on how many staff you have, and you have to remit that by the February deadline. And then the treasurer will, our treasurer will then review all of the monthly financial reports, the bank statements, the income statements, the revenue expense summaries, the tax reports, the source deductions, basically everything. And then put that into a treasurer's report, and that's ramping up and getting ready for our annual general meeting. That has to be presented to the membership. And that treasurer's report will include opening and closing balances on all our bank accounts, income statements, membership numbers, and revenue. And then all of that package goes to the auditor. At WCLA, we appoint an auditor from within our membership. That's the way it's always been done. And then that auditor goes over the books with a fine tooth comb and then reports at our AGM. And, well, let's just see, is there anything else? Oh, right, okay,
this is
determining
the
library
game.
expenses, the game.
So
All
the
right.
plan was to bring a bucket of my kids' Halloween candy to throw at the winners, but then I forgot it, so sorry. So we just came up, we tried to be creative and probably failed a little bit. So collections, anyone guess where that goes under? What kind of expense? Yay.
Yay, ding, ding, ding.
CPD, lunch and learns.
See, that's why it's so hard to write policy about this stuff.
Mentoring programs. AGMs. Spring dinner. Pizza at the board meetings. There's writing on the box. So just be careful, and when you don't know, call. And then we have a funny clip, but I don't know if we can play it. Katie, can we play it?
Will it play?
I don't think there's a video up there. There's no link.
Oh, no. Well, we tried. It was a really hilarious clip from Schitt's Creek about what's a write-off and them not really understanding it, so, no. Right now, I'm having a debate with my partner that a pair of shoes are a firm expense. He says no, I say yes.
Those are amazing shoes.
These are not them, Missy's wearing them. They're Louboutins, and Anthony's probably right. Questions?
No questions? Oh, we've got one, we've got time for a quick one. Very quick. Fire away.
We haven't discussed accumulated surpluses and the letters that have gone out recently stealing back money from some of us.
It's not stealing back money, it's unspent grant money.
Stealing back money.
Okay, you can call it that, but it's accumulated surplus of grant funds that were not used for its intended purposes.
Nor does the letter comply with the policies that you put out.
I'm sorry?
Nor does the letter comply with the wording of the policies that have been put out.
In what way?
The policies talk about accumulated surplus dollars from funds granted in a year. Your letters are dealing with accumulated surpluses going back many years in some cases. That's not what the policy says.
I think you're to expect challenges.
Fair enough, but if we want to talk about specific circumstances, it's best to do that one-on-one. In general, grant fund monies are given for a specific purpose. When they're not spent for that purpose, they need to come back.
Well, I think we should probably have a meeting for all the associations that have gotten a letter.
There have been quite a few. How many? Over 20.
Yeah, there's over 20. Yeah.
Well, I'm from the Elgin Law Association. This is a follow-up to the notice provision that we were given. 30 days to put together a business case as to how or why we will spend the money. Our library was closed over COVID. We didn't have a librarian in there to physically look at everything and see where we could update our collection and use the money in the time it was allotted for. And now we have to justify updating our collection, spending the money in a less than 30-day window to get back to you with the business case. If you had given us more time to do this, or maybe tell us, okay, you have the surplus, use it by the end of the year, we would be able to do that, no problem. We need our collection updated in our library itself. And giving us very little time to get back to you with this business case thing is very unhelpful in these circumstances. Like, we're looking at losing thousands of dollars in our library where we have outdated computers. We had increased IT expenses this year because our computers are so outdated and we're still waiting on them to arrive. You put us in a rock and a hard place situation. And so I would ask that you reconsider this plan that you put forward in order for us to actually practically deal with it. If you say, okay, you have this surplus, you can spend it this year, great, I will spend my money, not a problem, at the end of this quarter. But just say we're calling it back next year unless you prove to us that you need this money. when it's already been allocated for things we couldn't physically spend it on because of COVID. It's made it very difficult for us.
Can I just follow up on that? The amount of time you've given us to put together case studies or business studies to say how best to spend money is simply not sufficient. We are all volunteers, our boards are all volunteers. COVID has impacted on not just what we've been able to do, but how quickly we can get quotes and information. We simply need more time. And then the time you provided is not sufficient.
Are you able to stay through the break?
Yep.
Okay, why don't we park that question, because we've got to get to our next speaker, and you guys, everyone, Teresa's going to be here over the break.
I'll be here over the break. I'm sitting right there, so.
Yeah, so we can discuss that, and come to me if you don't get a chance to talk to Theresa, and we can figure out a way that we can carry on this conversation after plenary, because I don't think you're staying tonight, is that right?
I am staying tonight.
Oh, you are?
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Oh,
so
well,
I'll be
then.
around tomorrow morning.
In for a lot of abuse, it sounds like.
Well, I'm not going to the event tonight, but I will be around tomorrow morning.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a real delight to be here, and in particular, it's so wonderful to hear the discussion in the last hour, particularly about the value of libraries to the work that the legal community does and the work that we do in the province and for you and your clients. I've been a librarian for a long time, and I started out as a law librarian in some of the law firms in downtown Toronto. And I've always felt that we had the support of the firms that we work for. And I think that we continue to do good work, but the work is changing. And I want to just talk a little bit about how the work's changing. I think you all, and just remember that I'm speaking from the outside in some ways in looking in. I'm not familiar with each of your associations and what your particular requirements are. So I'm speaking at a fairly high level about librarianship and what you can expect from your library staff, remembering that there will be differences in each situation that you're in. And so in some ways I'm talking to the best practice of, but it was also really reassuring to hear you talk about how you're working on policies related to your libraries and setting standards for service across the province, because I think that's really important to be thinking about that kind of thing. So as I mentioned, libraries are evolving, and libraries have been changing for a long time. I've been a librarian for 40 years, and I can tell you when I started out with catalog cards. So we're way beyond that one, way beyond CD-ROMs. We're in the cloud now. And what that has, I think, really opened up the availability and accessibility of information to lawyers and to their clients, and certainly to libraries and to what it is that we can provide. But we do know, and I think all of you have talked about what it is that they do that means that they're essential to the practice of lawyers across the province. Provide access to print and digital case law treatises, gov docs, information, news, and local and business activities. No question, in particular about in a world where misinformation seems to be so paramount and so scary, libraries tend to be that one place and where information can be found that's correct. And I think that continues to be very important and even more prominent as we move forward. Certainly, libraries are important to keep lawyers informed of new resources that are out there. Things are changing all the time. Legislation, what's happening in the law, and what kind of government policies might be coming down that are going to impact their work. And I think libraries always, and I can tell from the way you speak of them and talk about them, they're very proactively supporting you in your work for your clients. So what's different about staff, too? Certainly, as I mentioned before, that whole issue of legal online research, current awareness, the use of technology for providing information, and they've also become more and more prominently trainers and teachers. And you mentioned mentoring a few minutes ago about how it is that library staff mentor people. We train, and sometimes it's in a more formal training session, but also it can be just, can I help you learn how to do this? Or can I help you with this kind of thing? Or did you know that this information was here? So that's really important. They're negotiators, you know? Listen, the publishers aren't open with their prices. We don't just buy a book anymore. We have to negotiate what that price is going to be. We're marketers and advocates. And I think because some of your associations are so small, you're also marketing and advocating for the association. When a new member comes in or a member who hasn't used the library that much, they can see the benefit that they get from their membership in the association through their using the library. They're also promoting the library, you know, how it is that we, what it is that we do, what it is that we can do for you, what's the benefit of that. And also pleased to hear you say about how you're advocating to the benchers for the libraries, you know, that you have to step out and make sure that the benchers understand what it is that you need and want. They can be record keepers. Librarians are trained in really interesting ways, and it's, I taught at the University of Toronto for the last 20 years, so I can tell you how the education has changed. And so it's a very different approach to information, very different approach to using data and presenting data and making data accessible. And that means that we're really good at data keeping, record keeping, all of those kinds of things. And there are many things that we do that can support that. We're also responsible for, from what I hear, for the administrative support and budgeting. And that's another key thing that sometimes we're taught at school and sometimes we learn later on. And of course, the qualifications and experience are really going to be different based on the needs of each of your associations and certainly the staff availability. I heard you speak about that earlier too, that in some smaller areas or less population, you might not have the same kind of access to a variety of people with different knowledge. Some, of course, will come with legal information and background and knowledge. Others, we're going to develop it through experience. So what do we mean when we talk about a librarian? And the term is used generally to represent library staff, but there are some differences in terms of education. So librarians themselves, if I'm a professional librarian, I would have a master's degree from an American Library Association accredited university program. So in Ontario, there are 2 schools that provide that. University of Toronto, Faculty of Information, also called the iSchool, and Western Master of Library and Information program, and they call theirs the MLIS. So that's a master's degree, so they have an undergraduate degree and then a master's degree. Library technician has a diploma from a 2-year college program, and it's accredited by the Canadian Library Association. There are 5 of those in Ontario, Seneca, Mohawk, Algonquin, Conestoga, and Confederation. And there are other people, library assistants, who bring a mix of education background and skills. And of course, who you hire, what you hire will again be based on what your needs, availability, that kind of thing. And of course, their job responsibilities are going to vary. Some are going to have supervisor or management experience. They might be working full or part-time for you. They could be doing reference, of course, cataloging. We already talked about collection development and purchasing, training, marketing, providing administrative support, professional development, records management, and a lot of librarians tend to do internet and intranet sites as well. When you're looking for a librarian, lots of places. I mean, there's the general posting sites such as Indeed, places like that. The University of Toronto iSchool has a very good site that everybody tends to look to. And while there's something called the Partnership Job Board, where all of the associations, provincial library associations from across the country, they have one job board that you can go to for any job across the country. It's always interesting to look at that, to see what people are hiring for, what are the kind of skill sets, how do they post the job, what do they say in them, and just what's out there, what you're competing against. At U of T iSchool, they would graduate about 135 students a year. Of that, right now, probably 60 to 70% would go into the technology stream. So UX designers, data managers, that kind of thing. There are fewer and fewer students who are going into the library stream. Western is a little bit different in terms of it's really producing more true library workers or professional librarians, but you see a lot of change in U of T. So that I see as a problem in terms of recruitment down the road. So how do we get people interested in coming to our library? Certainly, I think people are looking in variety for their jobs, right? So they want change, they want to be able to grow. What's happened in the last 2 or 3 years with COVID is, of course, as we know, really changing the way people want to work with one another and how they want to run their personal lives as well. So they want that flexibility. Am I able to work from home? Can I do things in a different way than I've done before? They want to have training. And I was glad to hear that LiRN is having training programs. That's really important to get everybody up on new things, but also it keeps people interested in their jobs and wanting to stay in. Career growth, and this is difficult in a small association where you might only have one role that people can stay into. I think that making the job interesting, giving them different opportunities within the organization, connecting their job to what the association is doing is all very important so that people feel that they're growing and changing. Good salary. This is always a tough one because none of us have a lot of money. And what can you do? And salary is something that will bring people in but not necessarily keep them. In terms of once they're happy there, they might be willing to accept less salary. But it's, with cost of living and that right now, it becomes more of an issue. This is something also you're talking about with LiRN in terms of, having those standards and guidelines for hiring. So the importance of keeping your job descriptions updated. And it's a good idea to compare them with what other associations and libraries are doing as well to make sure that you're using the same kind of terminology, hitting the right sort of skill sets, making sure that people can connect with them. So what do we look for when we hire a librarian? And, it's funny, the first thing I've got up there is curiosity. I used to work with a librarian, and she always described herself as a private detective because all she did was she's looking for information. We were going to find, she could find you anything, that person. So you really want somebody who is interested in looking, who's interested in the law. One of the things I really enjoyed about being a law librarian was like some of the case law you'd come up with was pretty cool. And so just being able to find that stuff. I remember one question I got was, and I remember the answer but not the question. But the answer was, it was related to Charles Dickens. It was a Charles Dickens novel. And there was a case does anybody know which novel I'm talking about? One of his stories. But the story was about a case, a law case. And the question knew the name of that's right, yeah. They knew the answer was, and so I hadn't read that. But those are the kinds of things that hit with you. But it's around curiosity, and that's what makes you, I think, a good librarian in many ways. It's being able to look and find and not giving up. Certainly a willingness to learn. As we mentioned before, the real change in technology, the change in the way libraries are running, the change in the expectations of users who need information from the library. So that means that we need people who are willing to learn and change themselves. So they want to take that professional development. They want to try new things. They like technology because the reality is in the library world, if you don't like technology, you're going to be in trouble because that's what all it's about because that's where the information is. You need to have an interest in law and legislation. I was very lucky in my career. I got to work in law firms and then I got to work in a legislature. And there's a very interesting place to work as a legislature. And so that, because I had an interest in it, because I had poli-sci background, I had a certain amount of knowledge and curiosity around it that kept me there. So looking for people who have that. Certainly, as I mentioned before, having up-to-date skills and being comfortable with technology. Customer service. I mean, there's nothing better than when you walk in and get great, true customer service. Someone speaks to you, they're happy to have you come in, they want to do their best for you. So that how to bring people in. And that ties in with the advocacy, that ties in with building the members in your association. It ties in with having a great, people having a great view of your library. Good fit. You know what? We all have to like the people we work with because we spend a lot of time with them. So what's fit? How do they compare with the other people in the organizations? When I used to teach, I always would make the students do a personality test. And then we talk about how you didn't want all the same people in the room. If you have a room full of peacekeepers, you're not going to get much done. You know what? You need the people who are going to press. You need the people who are going to push. You need the people who are going to take the leadership role. So how do these people fit in with the group that you have? Maybe a small group or a larger group, but you need to think about that. People who are flexible. Some days you're going to need them to do things differently, to take on a different role than you've asked. You've got a small group of people, you need people who are willing to jump in and help out. And that ties in with that cooperative approach to their colleagues and the association members. So what about you guys working with your library staff? I think it's really important that as early on, as soon as you get onto into your role, onto the board, or into your role as president or vice president, is to start building that rapport with the library staff. It's a partnership. It really is. You're all working together. You have certain goals in mind for your association. You want to make sure that everybody's on the same page. You want to share the information and communicate your needs and ideas. And openness is really, really important. We talked earlier about the strategic plan for this association. And I think that it's really important to think about and make sure that you have a strategic plan for your library. Hopefully you have one for your association, and then the one that you have for your library will tie into that. There needs to be that really strong connection between what the association wants and needs to do and how the library is going to support that. And it's important then further on that to, when you have your strategic plan, to identify your goals and then to each year come back to it and talk to your librarian. Okay, how have we met that? What it is that you can do specifically to get there? So that tying in is really, really important to see that connection between the association and the library. You both need information. So you as a president, vice president, executive director, you need to meet regularly with your staff. And you're going to expect to get from them updates on the use or activity of the library, who's using the library, who's not, what are the levels. Maybe you keep a variety of statistics of how much the use is. What are things that are happening? Are there things that need support, resolution? How can I help you to do that? What are the resources I need to do that? Can I have you make a phone call or just speak to somebody, or what can I do to get there? I always thought as a manager, my job really is to give people the resources to get their job done. And that's true in a president or in a board role. Resource requirements. So again, this just goes back to the strategic planning. You have to think about what it is that you want to do, where your priorities are, and then think about how you're going to spend your budget in order to get there. And then again, setting short and long-term plans and directions. As a vice president or president, it's important that you share what you know. Again, going back to what's the association planning and what are its activities? What does it need to do? What's happening with its members? Are there specific things that I need to know? As a librarian, if I want to, when I used to work for a law firm, every morning I would read the newspaper. Because often there would be an article in there about an industry that we perhaps represented or a client that we represented. And also there might be some policy issue or legislation coming down, and so I need to have an idea ahead of time what I might be asked about that day. So the more I know about what's happening in my area, what's happening with the members, the more prepared I can be in order to gather information or be prepared for, be ready when those kinds of questions or requests for information come in. Certainly budget. I mean, we've talked a lot about budget in the last couple of hours. How's the money allocated? Where's it go to? Where it's coming from? Updates from LiRN. Are you getting information from LiRN that perhaps the librarian or library staff are not getting? Just want to make sure that everybody's on the same page. Other things that might be coming back. And really, you know, what's kind of feedback? So are you hearing things from the membership or others that the library should know about, you know? Is there a resolution, or is somebody upset about something? Are they saying they need something different from the library than they might not be getting? So that feedback that you can send back to the librarian is very important as well. So, how to retain great staff? So I you know, in the middle of the night, reading Facebook, I found this little poster, employees stay when they are paid well, mentored, challenged, promoted, involved, appreciated, trusted, empowered, and valued. You know, and actually I had actually written the other piece before I found the little poster. But I think that they're all very important. So retaining great staff as much as possible, give them an interesting and varied role. Meet with them regularly, listen to them. Sit down and spend some time with them to learn about what's going on. Let them try new things and not be afraid of failure. That's the hardest thing for people to do. And a lot of it's, you know, it's interesting. I taught, as I said, I taught people in the library school for a long time. And when I mentioned the personality tests, generally the biggest group, most people would fall into being helpers. That's a lot of people why librarians chose the profession. We help people, we want to do things. But sometimes we may be reluctant to try new things. We might be afraid of failure, perhaps because we failed before and not had a good response to that. We have high levels or very high expectations for ourselves and find it difficult to not actually 100% succeed. But I think that by letting people try new things and say, okay, listen, what did we learn from that? Let's try something different, can really help people move forward and you can get some innovation in what you're doing. Going back to the strategic plan, helping people to contribute to the goals of the association and the work of the member libraries. Help people to see that what they do directly impacts lawyers in their work, that they're then able to help their clients, that they're able to make a change, that they're able to forward the association and its goals in getting new members. As much as you can, providing adequate resources and ongoing support for the work of the library. Legal materials are expensive. You don't have that luxury of just sometimes of making the choice. Do I do it, as we mentioned before, do I take just electronic, do I just take print? Sometimes you have to do both. So the costs are high, publishers are expensive, legal information is very expensive. So it's important to try and find the resources that you can. Be interested in the work in the library's doing. Pay attention, you know, they're an important part of your association. We talked about supporting professional development and giving time and resources to connect with others, helping them grow in their career, making sure that they have the information they need, being a good employer who values and recognizes personal achievements and understands and supports personal and professional needs, and just helping people to support them and do a good job. So just to quickly end up, if you have the right staff in the partnership, so all of this that we've worked together, you can expect that your library will continue to provide a high level of service within the confines of available resources, will keep up to date and be responsive to the changing needs of association members, and will be proactive and look ahead with innovative ideas and approaches. Gee, right on 30 minutes. That's great.